Namaskar and welcome to Public Forum. I am Charu Karthike. In this edition, we shift focus to a resolution that has been passed by the Tamil Nadu Assembly asking the central government to boycott the meeting of the Commonwealth Heads of Government that is all set to happen in Colombo very soon. Joining us in the studio today, senior journalist and coordinating editor with the Asian Age, Anand Sai. Anandji, welcome to Public Forum. Professor Rajesh Rajagopalan, the School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. Professor Rajagopalan, thank you so much for coming here. And Dr. Sriram Cholia, Dean Jindal School of Global Affairs. Sriram, thank you so much for coming here. Sriram, what do you feel about this issue? There, of course, as we've all pointed out, that these demands have cropped up again and again. Earlier, in March 2013, when DMK quit the UPA as well as the government, this was the demand on their minds on the UNHRC vote against Sri Lanka issue. Earlier, before that, we have seen the AIADMK government in Tamil Nadu protesting against Sri Lankan army officers receiving training in the defense defense institutes in India. And subsequent, it presented another tricky situation. So these situations have kept coming up. Has Delhi been able to formulate a policy as to how to deal with these pressure that is emanating from competitive politics in Tamil Nadu?
I think we are in a quandary from Delhi, not only in terms of managing this hot potato of Tamil Nadu politics, but generally in terms of loss of leverage vis-a-vis Sri Lanka. I mean, since the war ended 4 years ago, there's hardly any means by which we are able to influence what's going on there. And our interests and our preferences are not being heeded at all by the Rajapaksa regime. So that's, I think, the subtext of this rage in Tamil Nadu. Because the state government, in a way, feels that the center has let the Tamil people down. It has not been able to influence and change the behavior of the state in Sri Lanka. To be more accommodative and to devolve power through autonomy and to create genuine reconciliation in that country. So, in a way, it's a reflection on the failure of our foreign policy that there is so much outrage. Because if we had somehow succeeded, let us assume, in the last few years to bring greater equality and parity for Tamil-speaking people in the north and east of Sri Lanka, it wouldn't have gotten this bad. The reality on the ground is not being exaggerated by Tamil parties. Let's be clear about it. It's pretty bad. Although they had provincial elections in the north and in the east in the past, the point is the Supreme Court has recently ruled out that when it comes to control over land and policing, which are the two most sensitive issues, there is no federal system whatsoever, no devolution to the provincial councils. So if you have these toothless or paper tigers, which are being elected, what kind of representation, what kind of future does it hold for this island? I mean, it can break up in new forms of militancy in years or decades to come. So therefore, it's in the long run, I think some of the pressure is fruitful, but asking for Prime Minister or nobody to even show up at Commonwealth Heads of Government meetings is probably stretching it too far, simply because Sri Lanka is not the one issue there, right? Like, although it may be the host, there are various other agenda items at the Commonwealth Summit like this. 53 countries are going to be in attendance, except the Canadian Prime Minister, Stephen Harper. Pretty much all the heads of governments have confirmed that they're going to be there, or they're our key representatives. So how can we, not even send anyone? I mean, that's, I think, unreasonable, and that's obviously driven by the emotion and the passion in Tamil Nadu and the solidarity they feel for Tamil-speaking people. So I think the center, in a way, we need to also reflect upon this moment on the larger question of whether our neighborhood policy has failed and where we have not managed to, gain traction and find, build alliances in Sri Lanka, which would have led towards a more positive and liberal outcome. Right now, it's a totally illiberal, a kind of, piece of the graveyard that is being imposed on the people in the north and east. And that's, I think, we must not lose sight of the fuel that is adding to this fire.
All right. Yeah. Sriram, much of this neighborhood policy that you say has largely failed, it played out in an era when the polity within the boundaries, when the Indian polity was not as fragmented as it now is. Now the polity is highly fragmented, and now we are seeing increasing pressures on the neighborhood policy as well as larger concerns of the foreign policy. So is the task ahead gotten more and more difficult?
Yeah, this phenomenon in academic jargon we call it constituent diplomacy, where the subunits of a state are asserting themselves and in many ways charting out on their own paths, building relations with neighboring, especially with neighboring countries. There is a positive side of this. If you look at the Indian Punjab and the Pakistani Punjab, the Badals and the Sharif brothers on that side have actually, been trying to promote, faster trade and people-to-people links and so on. They have not been acting as hindrances like you have elsewhere in some of these other instances of constituent diplomacy. Even Bihar, I believe the Chief Minister has expressed an interest very strongly for trade and for liberalized outcomes with Nepal and with the Yunnan and Sichuan provinces of China. So this is going on, and I would say that in those cases it's rather working out in the larger national interests. Where there is obstructionism, I think we need to make a distinction between the good apples and the bad ones. And where there's obstructionism, I mean, strictly speaking, even in a quasi-federal system like ours, foreign and defense, these are issues which are in the hands of the central government. So what is going on right now is a kind of a politicization of the process which can be called unconstitutional. So the prerogative is with Delhi. In the past, as you know, we have taken decisions based on these pressures, and I suppose the state structure itself, as you said, is so vociferous right now. So there are just too many divisions in the state structure, and that is in a way superimposing itself on foreign policy. But remember again, this is limited only to the neighborhood, because when you go further away, these states have hardly any interest. So in a way, you could call it a kind of democratization of foreign policy, which is moving away from the hands of the the Mandarin sitting in South Block in Delhi into the hands of people whose lives are at stake and whose who will be more directly affected by these decisions, whatever policies. But the other way of looking at it is that this is totally unconstitutional.
All right. Sriram, is it also the case that because of the nature of competitive politics, you never know which party might go back on the stand that it has taken presently or previously on a particular issue regarding any of our neighbors? Is it also one of the reasons why we feel that the task ahead might become more and more difficult as far as the neighborhood policy is concerned?
Yeah, take the example of Tamil Nadu itself. I mean, if you go back in time to MGR, and from the 80s onwards when we began training and arming the LTTE, there have been so many flip-flops made by both these leading parties. I mean, the current Chief Minister Jayalalitha was once upon a time on the hit list of the LTTE, and now she is, taking the mantle of being the, champion for the downtrodden Tamil-speaking people of the north and east of Sri Lanka. So, and it seems like the perception is that the other side, the DMK, was not forthright enough in the end game of the Elam war when Prabhakaran was killed and LTTE was decimated. So there is now a perception that the opposition party actually is on the defensive and they need to make up for their dovish policies or opportunistic policies in 2008-2009. So they do make flip-flops, and I mean, I guess they calculate on the basis of what feeling the pulse of the public and trying to capitalize on it, or sometimes even inflaming public passions. But as far as the Commonwealth goes, I mean, the demand for example, getting Sri Lanka suspended, I think is a long shot. If you think about it, the only instances where countries have been suspended is mostly when they were under military rule. You take Fiji, Nigeria, Pakistan twice, apartheid South Africa in 1961 was forced to withdraw because of racial discrimination. But these are mostly cases. But if you look at Sri Lanka, it's not so much a lack of electoral democracy, right? Nobody denies that Rajapaksa has been elected through a majority. So when it comes to advocating for minority rights, I think globally also it's not really a norm. So even if India takes up, let's say, a cause like this, I don't think it's going to go very far, simply because it's not a military regime. It is definitely a civilian regime, which is highly illiberal. There's no question about it. It's centralized a lot of authority and has been, abusing human rights and press freedoms and all those things. We know that. So, but that sort of problem happens in many developing societies. You can't just suspend a country for being that or for not investigating war crimes during a counterinsurgency. So I guess that's where there is a limit to what these domestic political wishes in India can translate in form of foreign outcomes at the Commonwealth. So, I think the Prime Minister may or may not go, but certainly we should send a representative. There is supposed to be a leaders' retreat at the Commonwealth, where, in private, some of the Western leaders are at least trying to shame the Rajapakshas, not in public eye, but in front of all the other assembled members, and trying to push for it. So I think there is a merit also in participation. The logic that, just by participating we are legitimating that regime, I think is too far. I mean, simply because who's going to remember Rajapaksa is not up for election until November 2015. That's far away. There are some who are saying he is going to use Indian Prime Minister's presence, if he goes, in Colombo as a kind of a chip to advertise that his policies have succeeded and that now he has got all the major powers also on his side, and that's going to be his election campaign issue. I think it's too early. He's still got 2.5 years to go, and in between there's a lot that's going to change. Rather, India should be working with all the parties and all the critical players on the ground quietly and building bridges with the opposition as well as with the Sinhalese people in general. Because one of the problems with our Sri Lanka policy is perceived as just ethnically driven. It's only about the Tamils. We have not been speaking about the larger issue of the centralization and of authority and what they call the executive presidency and the so at the end of the day we want a liberal outcome there, and that suits our interests. So we should be pushing for it through participation, but also by mobilizing other members of the Commonwealth. There are 53 countries. There are going to be many of them heads of state. So even if we don't send Prime Minister, whoever goes should be in the position to be able to call a spade, at least in private, and that's important. And some of these leaders are actually saying, the British ones, for example, are saying, our media is going to come. They're going to get untrammeled access to North and East. We'll see for ourselves what's going on. So in a sense, participation, engagement is necessary to be able to also gauge, because we cannot be armchair critics also, right? India is doing a lot of development assistance and relief work in the North and East. Our staff and our implementing agencies are there. So we do know what's going on the ground. But at the same time, it's good to use these kind of opportunities to press home the point. Because then there will be a next UN Human Rights Council vote again next year. So it's going to be the same jamboree again and again, where there are going to be protests in Tamil Nadu and so on. Rather, I think we should be working towards thinking about alternatives. I mean, it's fine to say Sri Lanka is a sovereign state and we cannot interfere. But we do have preferences, right? I think if the UNP were ruling today in Sri Lanka rather than the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, I don't think it would have been this bad. They are perceived also as Sinhalese chauvinists by some hardline Tamils. But in general, it would have been a much more, equitable outcome for Tamil-speaking people. So I think it's in our interest. Sometimes we always say Sheikh Hasina is good for us. And we are wary about Jamaat-e-Islami and BNP, right? But then it's a sovereign country. But we do have ways and means to try and influence the politics
BNP
of countries. And we have to do, otherwise, there's also a so-called Indira doctrine, which try to, determine outcomes in the region, which would be beneficial for us and also beneficial for the people there. Remember, we're not talking about supporting one regime or the other. Our diplomacy should be supporting the people there and the people's interests. I don't think we have done that.
That's all we have time for. Anand Sahib, Professor Rajagopal, and Dr. Sriram Cholia, thank you so much for your time.